The hushed grandeur of the sovereign, a jewel in the crown of urban luxury, always promised an experience beyond compare. Its polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of bespoke chandeliers, reflecting the meticulous arrangements of fresh orchids in towering vases. The air, subtly scented with a custom blend of sandalwood and jasmine, hummed faintly with the distant murmur of polite conversation and the soft clinking of crystal from its Michelin-starred restaurant. It was a haven of discreet opulence, a place where the world's elite came to disappear into comfort, or to be seen in the most exclusive circles. Yet, beneath this shimmering veneer of perfection, a quiet unrest stirred, unseen by most, but keenly felt by some. Arthur Sterling, a name synonymous with global enterprise and staggering wealth, usually occupied the penthouse suites of such establishments, whisked through back entrances, his presence a carefully managed secret. Today, however, he walked through the main lobby, a slightly rumpled suit hanging a little too loosely on his frame, a 5 o'clock shadow giving his usually impeccably clean-shaven face an air of weary authenticity. His expensive, yet deliberately understated luggage looked like it had seen better days, intentionally scuffed to blend in with the general wear and tear of travel. He checked in under the name Mr. Davies, a nondescript alias chosen precisely for its lack of fanfare. Arthur Sterling, the visionary billionaire who owned a vast portfolio of properties including this very hotel, was now just another guest, a face in the crowd, intent on becoming entirely invisible. His mission: to understand the true pulse of his empire, to see it not through quarterly reports and executive briefings, but through the unfiltered lens of a common traveler. He sought the truth lurking beneath the polished surface, a truth he suspected had been obscured by layers of corporate polish and optimistic projections. From the moment he stepped out of the taxi, he hailed himself rather than being chauffeured. Subtle discrepancies began to prick at his senses. The bellhop, a young man with an eager but overwhelmed expression, struggled with the sheer volume of bags arriving simultaneously, and Arthur noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a sign of exhaustion. The check-in process, usually seamless and expedited for his real persona, dragged on for an uncomfortable 15 minutes as the front desk attendant fumbled with a new software update, her polite smile straining at the edges. Arthur, observing from the perspective of an ordinary guest, felt a flicker of annoyance, a sentiment he realized was likely common, yet rarely reported to the upper echelons of management. This was exactly what he came to find. His room, a standard deluxe on the 12th floor, a far cry from the sprawling penthouse Arthur typically commanded, presented further minor irritations. The remote control for the television was sticky, a detail easily missed by a casual glance, but deeply unsettling to someone accustomed to absolute perfection. A faint but persistent hum emanated from the mini-fridge, just loud enough to be distracting in the quiet of the night. The shower head, designed for a luxurious rainfall experience, was partially clogged, resulting in a rather sad, sputtering cascade. Each of these small imperfections, taken individually, seemed trivial. But collectively, they painted a picture of a hotel that, while outwardly magnificent, was faltering in its fundamental execution, its attention to detail slipping. Arthur felt a growing frustration, a deep-seated disappointment stirring within him. This was his hotel, his vision, yet the reality he was experiencing felt strangely disconnected from the impeccable standards he had meticulously instilled. The disconnect between his grand vision and this slightly frayed reality was a gnawing ache. He could see opportunities for improvement everywhere, glaringly obvious now that he was stripped of his identity and the protective bubble of his status. He understood now that the reports he received were sanitized, filtered through layers of eager-to-please subordinates. The truth, in its raw, imperfect form, was much harder to swallow. Before we delve deeper into Arthur's secret mission, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future stories of hidden identities and unexpected encounters. Arthur continued his clandestine operation, his days a meticulous tapestry of observation and quiet scrutiny. The initial minor inconveniences had escalated into a growing catalog of systemic inefficiencies, each one a tiny fissure in the grand edifice he had painstakingly built. He witnessed bellhops rushing guests without a genuine smile, front desk agents mechanically reciting policies rather than offering personalized assistance, and restaurant staff seemingly more concerned with upselling than ensuring a truly memorable dining experience. The corporate veneer, once a source of pride, now felt like a suffocating blanket, stifling the very soul of hospitality he believed his brand represented. He saw his dream, a place where luxury met genuine human connection, slowly being eroded by processes designed for speed and profit margins, not for people. His disenchantment deepened with every robotic interaction he observed. Guests were merely transactions, employees cogs in a well-oiled, yet emotionally barren machine. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, not by any individual, but by the very system he had unwittingly allowed to proliferate. The hotel, his hotel, felt distant, impersonal, a far cry from the vibrant, welcoming haven he had envisioned. He tried to reconcile the glowing customer reviews, carefully curated and often incentivized, with the cold reality unfolding before his eyes. The disconnect was jarring, a chasm between perception and truth that widened with each passing hour. Amidst this growing disillusionment, a different kind of observation began to emerge. Her name was Elena, a cleaning lady whose presence was almost ethereal, a ghost gliding through the opulent hallways, yet leaving behind an unmistakable trail of meticulous order. She was unassuming, dressed in the standard uniform, her face often obscured by strands of hair that escaped her practical bun. Most guests, and indeed most staff, barely registered her existence. She was part of the background, one of the countless, invisible workers who kept the grand machinery of the hotel running smoothly, unnoticed and largely unappreciated. Arthur, however, noticed. Early one morning, while observing the breakfast rush from a secluded corner of the dining area, he saw her. A young child had accidentally spilled a glass of orange juice near a high-traffic table. Before any waiter could react, Elena, pushing her cleaning cart quietly past, had knelt, not just wiping the spill, but doing so with a quiet efficiency that spoke of practiced care, her movements swift and precise. She didn't scurry away once done. Instead, she paused, offering a small, comforting smile to the embarrassed parents and a gentle pat on the child's head, all without uttering a single word. It was a small act, almost insignificant, yet it stood in stark contrast to the harried efficiency of the serving staff. Later that day, as he walked through one of the hotel's less frequented corridors, he found himself almost colliding with her. She was coming out of a room, her cart laden with fresh linens and cleaning supplies. He mumbled an apology, expecting a perfunctory nod or a quick, "no problem." Instead, she looked up. Her eyes, dark and surprisingly deep, met his for a brief moment. There was no judgment, no recognition, just a fleeting glimmer of quiet understanding, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of his presence. She offered a small, almost shy smile, a genuine curve of her lips that transformed her otherwise composed demeanor. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, and she continued her work, leaving Arthur momentarily unsettled. He started consciously seeking her out, not to interact, but merely to observe. He noticed her diligence, the way she straightened a crooked painting in a hallway, retrieved a forgotten scarf from a chair, or meticulously polished a brass railing that most would overlook. Her movements were economical, her focus unwavering. There was no pretense in her actions, no performance for an audience. She simply did her work, and she did it with an uncommon thoroughness. He watched as she paused to gently reset a potted plant that had been jostled, or arranged a stack of newspapers with an almost artistic precision in the lobby. These were not duties explicitly outlined in her job description, yet she performed them, not for praise or recognition, but seemingly because they needed doing, because it enhanced the overall experience of the space. Arthur found himself drawing parallels. Most of the staff he observed were like actors on a stage, performing their roles for the guests, their smiles practiced, their politeness rehearsed. Elena, however, was the quiet architect of comfort behind the scenes, her contributions understated yet foundational. She was the one ensuring the stage itself remained immaculate, the unseen hand that made the performance possible. He noticed how she always seemed to anticipate needs, whether it was restocking a small amenity before it completely ran out or tidying a common area just before it became truly messy. She operated with an intuitive understanding of the hotel's rhythm, a silent guardian of its well-being. One afternoon, he lingered near the staff entrance to the service elevators, pretending to read a newspaper, actually observing the flow of employees. He saw the tired faces, the hurried chatter, the occasional complaint about a demanding guest or an unreasonable quota. Then Elena emerged, pushing her cart, her face unreadable, yet her eyes scanned the surroundings, taking everything in. A colleague bumped into her, nearly sending a stack of towels tumbling. Elena merely steadied the pile with a quick, practiced hand and offered a small, reassuring nod, without a hint of irritation. It was a subtle act of grace in an environment that often felt defined by hurried transactions and barely contained stress. These subtle interactions, these quiet observations, began to chip away at Arthur's earlier frustrations. While the corporate systems felt broken and the general staff felt disconnected, Elena represented something else entirely. She embodied a deeper, more authentic dedication, a commitment to excellence that transcended job descriptions and performance metrics. She was the true embodiment of the ethos he had once dreamed of for his hotel, a quiet testament to the dignity of labor, performed with care and genuine attention. Her quiet presence was a stark contrast to the more theatrical service provided by others, and it made Arthur realize just how much he had overlooked, how much genuine value was being perpetually ignored, hidden in plain sight, beneath the polished surface of his own empire. The opulent facade of the hotel, once a source of immense pride for Arthur, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping him in a cycle of mounting frustration. He watched from the dimly lit corner of the lobby as a young couple, clearly distressed, tried to explain a booking error to a harried front desk clerk. The clerk, a new hire named Brenda, seemed overwhelmed, her rote apologies sounding hollow and insincere. Her eyes darted nervously between the unhappy guests and her computer screen, offering solutions that sounded more like excuses. Arthur's internal barometer for customer satisfaction was plummeting. He saw the genuine anxiety on the couple's faces, the weariness from what was clearly a long journey, and the growing exasperation as Brenda fumbled through her explanation. It was precisely this kind of impersonal, procedural interaction that chipped away at the guest experience, eroding the very foundation of luxury and bespoke service he had painstakingly tried to build. He felt the familiar twitch in his jaw, the urge to step forward, to take control, to simply fix it. His hotel, his vision, was faltering under the weight of indifferent execution. He retreated to a less conspicuous spot, observing with a heavy heart. Just as the young woman's voice began to rise in frustration, a quiet figure emerged from the back office area. It was Elena. She moved with an almost ethereal grace, her presence subtle yet impactful. Elena didn't immediately intervene in the booking dispute. Instead, she paused, assessing the scene, her gaze unwavering. Then, without a word, she subtly redirected a junior bellhop who was idly leaning against a pillar, urging him with a gentle nod towards a family struggling with an overflowing luggage cart nearby. The bellhop, perhaps accustomed to Elena's silent authority, snapped to attention and quickly offered assistance. It was a small act, almost imperceptible to others, but Arthur noticed it. He saw how Elena anticipated needs, how she smoothed over the rough edges of the hotel's operations without fanfare. Later that afternoon, Arthur witnessed another scene that further solidified his growing respect for Elena. A child, no older than 5, had dropped his ice cream cone in the main hallway, dissolving into a fit of tears. The child's parents were flustered, trying to console him while simultaneously attempting to clean up the sticky mess. A passing manager offered a cursory apology and called for a cleaner over his walkie-talkie, but made no move to assist directly. Moments later, Elena appeared, not just with a cleaning cart, but with a small wrapped chocolate bar in her hand. She knelt down to the child's level, her face etched with genuine empathy. She cleaned the floor efficiently, but more importantly, she spoke softly to the boy, offered him the chocolate, and even managed to coax a small, tearful smile from him. She explained that sometimes accidents happen, and it was all right. The parents looked at her with profound gratitude, an expression Arthur hadn't seen directed at any other staff member during his undercover stay. Elena hadn't simply cleaned a mess, she had salvaged a moment, transforming a minor crisis into a gesture of unexpected kindness. These were the intangible acts, the quiet contributions that truly defined hospitality, yet went largely unnoticed by the rigid performance metrics of his corporate structure. Arthur found himself tracking Elena's movements throughout the day, a silent, unseen observer. He watched her meticulously polish the already gleaming brass fixtures in the elevator, pause to write a crooked painting in a corridor, or quietly offer a struggling elderly guest an arm to steady them as they navigated a slight incline. She often left small, personalized notes for guests, a fresh flower in a vase she had just cleaned, a carefully folded towel shaped like an animal in a child's room, a mint left precisely on a pillow in an otherwise unserviced room. These weren't part of her job description. They were acts of genuine care, born from a deep-seated commitment to making each guest feel valued. His own room became a laboratory for observation. He deliberately left a half-empty water glass on his bedside table, and upon his return, found it replaced with a fresh, chilled bottle of sparkling water, a tiny handwritten note beside it, wishing him a pleasant afternoon. Another time he forgot a specific, albeit inexpensive, book on his desk. Elena, without altering anything else, had simply placed a bookmark precisely where he'd left off reading. Her attention to detail was astounding, bordering on intuitive. The next morning, his impulse to intervene almost cost him his cover. A delivery truck, blocking the main entrance, had caused a minor traffic jam of impatient luxury sedans. A young concierge was visibly flustered, shouting into his phone, demanding the truck be moved, alienating both the truck driver and the arriving guests. Arthur felt a surge of familiar impatience, the need to streamline, to solve. He took a single decisive step forward, his hand unconsciously reaching for his non-existent tie. He wanted to bark orders, to command efficiency, to remind everyone that this was a five-star establishment, not a chaotic market. But just as his lips parted, he caught sight of Elena, calmly approaching the delivery driver. She spoke softly, her tone even, her hands making a simple, reassuring gesture. Within minutes, the driver, who had been stubbornly resisting the concierge's aggressive demands, was cooperating, skillfully maneuvering his vehicle just enough to allow ingress and egress for the waiting cars. Arthur watched the scene unfold, his initial impulse to act dying down, replaced by a renewed commitment to his silent observation. He pulled back, melting into the shadows of a large potted plant, chastising himself for the near lapse. It was a stark reminder of his mission: to observe, not to fix, at least not yet. He needed to understand the underlying currents, the true heart of his establishment, and Elena, with her humble uniform and quiet dignity, seemed to hold the key to that understanding. The struggle between his ingrained instincts as a CEO and his current role as a disguised observer was a constant, gnawing battle within him. Arthur found himself caught in a profound shift of perspective, a quiet revolution happening within his own carefully constructed world. He had always viewed his employees through the lens of productivity reports, quarterly reviews, and profit margins. Now, through Elena, he was seeing the human element, the beating heart that animated the cold mechanics of a luxury hotel. Her unwavering dedication, her seemingly insignificant acts of kindness, coalesced into an image of genuine care that far surpassed any hospitality training module or corporate mandate. He began to understand that true excellence wasn't just about gleaming marble and Michelin-starred cuisine. It was about the subtle, often unseen efforts of individuals like Elena. She wasn't merely cleaning rooms. She was cultivating an atmosphere of welcome, a sense of home, for strangers passing through. He recognized a deep, almost instinctual respect blooming within him for this woman, a respect that transcended their supposed stations in life. She was, in essence, the true embodiment of the values he had once envisioned for his hotel, values that had somehow become lost amidst the relentless pursuit of expansion and status. This growing appreciation for Elena's unseen labor cast a harsh light on the hotel's current financial woes. He knew intimately the reports detailing the recent decline in profit margins. These numbers, once abstract figures on a spreadsheet, now took on a new, more visceral meaning. He began to connect the dots. The impersonal service he had observed from other staff members, the focus on superficial grandeur over genuine guest experience, and the subsequent dip in customer loyalty and, ultimately, revenue. It wasn't just about cutting costs or maximizing efficiency. It was about a fundamental disconnect with the very essence of hospitality. The hotel was losing its soul, and he, Arthur, the man who built it, had been too far removed to notice until now. He realized that the impersonal approach, while perhaps appearing streamlined on paper, was actually bleeding the business dry of the very thing that made it valuable, its human connection. One afternoon, a particularly boisterous and demanding guest, a woman adorned in ostentatious jewelry and a scowl, launched into a furious tirade at the front desk. Her luggage was late, Her room wasn't precisely to her liking, and the complimentary champagne, she declared, was barely sparkling. The young receptionist, visibly intimidated, stammered apologies, her face flushed with distress. A manager was summoned, but his attempts to placate the guest only seemed to fuel her anger further, as he offered a generic apology and a bland promise of redress. The scene escalated, drawing the uncomfortable gazes of other arriving guests. Just then, Elena emerged from the back office, pushing her cleaning cart. She moved with her characteristic quiet efficiency, her eyes taking in the volatile situation without betraying any outward emotion. Arthur, lurking near a display of antique maps, watched intently, expecting her to simply pass by. But she didn't. Without a word, she subtly positioned her cart, almost imperceptibly, between the irate guest and the flustered manager, creating a soft buffer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying an undeniable authority that immediately drew the woman's attention, Elena spoke. "Madam," she began, her tone calm and steady, "I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced. Sometimes even the best systems have hiccups. May I offer you something from our lounge while the manager personally sees to your room's adjustments and locates your luggage? I believe our freshly brewed herbal tea might be just the thing to soothe the nerves after a long journey." Her words were simple, yet they possessed a genuine warmth, a practical offer of comfort completely devoid of the forced pleasantries the manager had been employing. The demanding guest, caught off guard by Elena's unexpected intervention and calm demeanor, paused. The anger, though still simmering, visibly deflated. Elena didn't offer excuses or make grand promises. She offered a solution, a moment of respite, and a personal touch. The manager, still a little stunned, quickly recovered and ushered the now slightly mollified guest towards the lounge, his promises of personalized attention now carrying more weight, backed by Elena's initial calm. Arthur watched as the tension dissolved, an almost imperceptible ripple through the lobby returning to its usual hum. He felt a profound sense of awe. Elena hadn't just diffused a situation, she had elegantly transformed it. She had understood the guest's underlying need, not just for a perfect room or sparkling champagne, but for validation and empathy. Her practical approach, her quiet confidence, and her innate ability to connect on a human level were qualities no amount of money could buy or training could fully instill. This single incident solidified his appreciation for her, elevating it beyond mere respect to a deep, unshakable admiration. He realized then that Elena wasn't just an employee. She was the living embodiment of the hotel's true potential, a silent guardian of its integrity. It was a realization that would soon compel him to abandon his self-imposed distance and engage with the reality he had uncovered. His disguise felt increasingly like a cumbersome shell, obscuring the solutions he now knew lay right before him. The quiet dignity of Elena, her unassuming acts of thoughtful service, had begun to chip away at Arthur's carefully constructed detachment. He found himself increasingly preoccupied by her presence, by the stark contrast she presented against the backdrop of his hotel's increasingly impersonal operations. The financial reports lay heavy on his mind, a constant, nagging reminder of the declining profit margins he'd seen in his true persona. From his incognito vantage point, he could now vividly see the connection between the cold, corporate efficiency he'd fostered and the struggling bottom line. Guests weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were individuals seeking an experience, and that experience, he now realized, was often shaped by the quiet efforts of people like Elena. One particularly rainy afternoon, a rare lull had settled over the usually bustling hotel. Arthur, feeling the weight of his responsibilities and the profound sense of disconnect he had uncovered, sat alone in his oversized suite. The city outside was a blurred watercolor through the rain-streaked windows, mirroring the tumultuous state of his thoughts. He had spent days observing, analyzing, and now he felt a crushing loneliness. His mission, initially a detached exercise in corporate espionage, had become deeply personal. He was no longer just Arthur, the billionaire CEO. He was a man grappling with the consequences of his own empire, a man wrestling with the uncomfortable truth that his vision had, in many ways, lost its soul. He loosened the knot of his cheap tie, a prop in his elaborate charade, and leaned back, exhaling slowly. The opulent room, usually a symbol of his success, now felt strangely hollow. He considered calling his executive assistant, his chief of operations, anyone who could offer a remote explanation for the growing chasm between his corporate directives and the human element. But he knew such a call would be an admission of failure in his undercover operation, a premature end to his self-imposed exile. At that precise moment, Elena glided into his suite, a soft knock barely preceding her entrance. Her cleaning cart, meticulously organized, silently followed her. Arthur, lost in his reverie, flinched, startled by her sudden appearance. He hadn't heard the door click open, hadn't registered her presence until she was already several steps inside, her movements as fluid and unobtrusive as ever. He watched her for a moment, unseen. She moved with quiet efficiency. Her eyes, however, were not merely scanning for dust. They darted, observed, absorbed. Today, there was a peculiar glint in them, a flicker of something beyond routine. As she began to tidy the space, her gaze fell upon his worn leather briefcase, accidentally left slightly ajar on the coffee table. Inside, peeking out from beneath a crumpled receipt for a cheap diner meal, was a high-end financial journal, its cover featuring a highly detailed, almost scientific analysis of global market trends. This was not the typical reading material of an average, slightly disheveled guest. Elena paused, her hand hovering over a smudge on the table. Her eyes lingered on the journal for an extra beat, a tiny furrow appearing between her brows. It wasn't the opulence of the item that caught her attention. She was accustomed to seeing expensive belongings. It was the stark incongruity, the juxtaposition of the complex financial publication with the guest's deliberately unremarkable persona. It didn't scream billionaire, but it certainly whispered more than meets the eye. She didn't touch the briefcase, didn't overtly acknowledge its contents. Her professional training dictated discretion. Yet Arthur, though pretending to be engrossed in his phone, felt the subtle shift in her demeanor. He sensed her keen observation, the almost imperceptible pause, the way her eyes seemed to weigh the evidence. He swallowed, a sudden dryness in his throat. He had been so careful, so meticulous, yet a single forgotten detail, a slip in his carefully constructed identity, had seemingly been caught by the one person he least expected, the quiet cleaning lady. Elena continued her work, her actions outwardly unchanged, but an undeniable undercurrent of heightened awareness now filled the room. She began to dust the ornate bookshelf near where Arthur sat, her back momentarily turned to him. He watched her reflection in the polished glass of the cabinet, unnerved by her quiet intelligence. He realized then that his disguise, while effective against the general staff, had been porous to Elena's unique brand of perception. She wasn't looking for obvious signs of wealth. She was looking for patterns, for discrepancies, for the subtle truths beneath the surface. He suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable, despite the layers of his charade. This was no longer a game of observation. It was a deeply personal encounter, one that felt inevitable, almost fated. The atmosphere in the opulent room grew thick with unspoken anticipation. He braced himself, knowing that the moment of truth was rapidly approaching. His reflection in the window showed a man trapped between two worlds, the billionaire and the common guest, both identities feeling equally fragile under Elena's silent scrutiny. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his early days of high-stakes corporate takeovers. He was about to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in weeks, and the thought was both terrifying and strangely, profoundly liberating. The soft hum of Elena's vacuum cleaner was the only sound breaking the building tension, a mere prelude to what was about to unfold. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that his undercover mission was about to take an unexpected and irreversible turn. The struggle persisted, a silent war within Arthur, yet he remained steadfast, dedicated to his self-imposed mission of understanding. Days turned into a week, each moment a revelation, each observation of Elena deepening his conviction that she held an invaluable perspective. He had begun to appreciate the sheer volume of work that went into maintaining the illusion of effortless luxury, the tireless efforts of people like Elena who operated beneath the polished surface. He spent an entire afternoon in the hotel's expansive yet often overlooked laundry facility, witnessing the relentless cycle of washing, drying, and folding, the sheer physical exertion involved. He saw how a tiny tear in a tablecloth, easily dismissed by an executive, meant an extra 10 minutes of meticulous mending for a seamstress, directly impacting their already tight schedule. These seemingly minor details, invisible from a corner office, formed the very foundation of the guest experience. Arthur felt a growing unease, a gnawing guilt over how far removed he had become from this essential reality. He returned to his suite that evening, the weight of his observations pressing down on him. The opulent furnishings now felt almost mocking, a symbol of the disconnect. He sat by the window gazing out at the city lights, a city he had in many ways built, yet now felt alien to him. His phone, which he kept hidden and rarely used, buzzed with a reminder of a board meeting he was missing, a meeting where numbers and projections would be discussed, entirely detached from the human element he was now experiencing firsthand. A deep sigh escaped him, a sound of profound weariness. The empire he had painstakingly built, the legacy he envisioned, felt fragile, teetering on the edge of an impersonal chasm. He questioned his own leadership, his understanding of what truly made a business thrive beyond mere profit margins. Was he merely a figurehead, oblivious to the heart and soul of his own enterprise? The thought was unsettling, a bitter taste in his mouth. Lost in these turbulent thoughts, the soft click of his room door opening barely registered. Elena, as always, moved with a quiet efficiency that rendered her almost imperceptible. She pushed her cleaning cart silently into the room, her gaze sweeping over the space with practiced ease. Arthur remained by the window, his back to her, deep in his reverie. He had become accustomed to her presence, a silent shadow performing her duties, and usually he would discreetly retreat to the balcony or step out for a walk during her cleaning rounds. But today, the mental burden was too heavy to move. He simply stared out, a silhouette against the urban glow. Elena began her meticulous work, her movements rhythmic and practiced. She tidied the desk, her eyes briefly scanning the few papers Arthur had laid out, some generic hotel brochures, a local newspaper, nothing overtly revealing. She moved to the bedside table, carefully replacing the water bottle, her movements precise. It was then, as she reached for a stray magazine, that her hand brushed against something cold and metallic beneath it. She paused, her fingers closing around a small, exquisitely crafted silver pen. Not a generic hotel pen, but one of significant weight and detailing, the kind that spoke of bespoke craftsmanship and considerable expense. Her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. This was not the first time she had noticed an item slightly out of place for a guest who seemed, on the surface, unremarkable. The previous day, while cleaning, she had found a discarded, half-empty container of a very specific, high-end herbal tea, the same blend she knew was exclusively stocked in the executive suites, never offered in standard rooms. She had mused on it then, dismissing it as a peculiar guest preference. But now, the pen. Her gaze drifted to Arthur's reflection in the window pane. He was still, contemplative, an aura of quiet authority radiating from him that seemed at odds with his slightly rumpled clothes and unassuming demeanor. Her eyes lingered on his hands, clasped behind his back, the strong, capable hands of someone accustomed to command, not casual leisure. The way he occupied the space, not as a temporary resident, but as someone observing, evaluating. She remembered the incident with the delivery truck, how his posture had shifted, how his lips had almost formed words of command before he'd checked himself. She recalled the subtle, almost imperceptible way he carried himself, even in his disguise, a bearing that spoke of an almost innate power. Slowly, deliberately, Elena placed the silver pen back on the table. She turned fully towards Arthur, her expression calm, her eyes meeting his reflection in the glass. He stirred, finally sensing her presence, turning to face her with a slight start. For a moment, he simply looked at her, his mind still clouded by his thoughts. Elena took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence of the luxurious room like a finely honed blade. "You are Arthur," she said, the three words hanging in the air, shattering the meticulously constructed facade he had maintained for weeks. Arthur froze. It wasn't a sudden jolt, but a visceral, all-encompassing stillness that seized his entire being. His breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic rhythm. The carefully assumed persona, the weeks of meticulous deception, the internal struggle of maintaining his cover, all of it crumbled in an instant, reduced to dust by her quiet declaration. His jaw tightened, a muscle throbbing involuntarily in his cheek. His mind raced, a whirlwind of disbelief, exposure, and an unexpected tremor of something akin to relief. How could she possibly know? Had he been so careless? The meticulously planned charade, the subtle nuances of his adopted identity, seemed to evaporate under her steady, knowing gaze. He stood there, utterly speechless, his eyes wide, fixed on her, searching for an explanation in her composed demeanor. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic beat of his own heart. Elena, meanwhile, remained poised, her hands gently resting on the cleaning cart, a quiet power radiating from her. She had seen him, truly seen him, beyond the disguise and the pretense. The game, he realized, was undeniably over. The intensity of Arthur's frozen shock gradually began to melt, replaced by a profound sense of surrender. He slowly nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her uncanny perception. Elena offered a small, knowing smile, a gesture devoid of triumph, filled instead with a quiet understanding. She stepped away from her cleaning cart, moving slightly closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "It wasn't one thing, Mr. Arthur," she began, her voice still calm, a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil within him. "It was many small things, building up over time. Your posture, for instance. Even when you tried to slouch, there was an underlying rigidity, a certain way you held your head, like you were always surveying, always in charge, even when pretending not to be. Most guests, they relax in their rooms. They let down their guard. You were always observing, always on alert, like a general inspecting his troops. Arthur listened intently, a flush rising on his neck. He had thought his disguise was impeccable, his performance flawless. He had studied the mannerisms of the average guest, meticulously crafting his persona. Yet, Elena, the cleaning lady, had seen through it all. Then there were your habits, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the room, as if recalling each clue. The way you organized your toiletries, not haphazardly, but with a precise, almost military order. The books you read, mostly business journals, economic reports, disguised with generic covers. But I noticed the subtle spine designs. We don't get many guests reading a detailed analysis of global supply chains for leisure. And the questions you'd sometimes ask, disguised as idle curiosity, about supplier contracts, staff turnover, guest feedback mechanisms. No typical guest cares about the efficiency of our laundry service or the psychological impact of room service wait times. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Arthur felt a strange mix of embarrassment and admiration. He had underestimated her, profoundly. He had seen her as an invisible part of the hotel, a cog in the machine, never realizing the depth of her observation, the sharpness of her intellect. And the little things, Elena added softly. The way you'd always ensure the door was fully closed, not just left ajar. The faint scent of a very exclusive cologne that even your disheveled clothes couldn't entirely mask. And yes, she conceded with a slight chuckle, the expensive herbal tea that only the executive suites receive, and that silver pen I found. Ordinary guests don't misplace items of that value so casually. They certainly don't carry them in their pockets if they're trying to blend in. Arthur let out a slow breath, a long-held tension finally releasing. You're right, Elena, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion, stripped bare of all pretense. You're absolutely right. I am Arthur. Arthur Sterling. And I came here to my own hotel, under a fake name, because I felt utterly disconnected from what was happening on the ground. He walked towards the window, looking out at the city skyline he owned a significant portion of, but felt so distant from. I built this empire, Elena, with a vision of unparalleled service, genuine hospitality, a place where every guest felt valued and every employee felt proud. But lately, the reports, the numbers, they told a different story, a story of declining profits, increasing complaints, a creeping coldness. I felt it, even from my office high above. I felt the soul of the place slipping away. He turned back to her, his expression etched with a raw honesty. I didn't want to just read reports, I wanted to see it, feel it, experience it as one of them, to understand where we were failing, not from a boardroom table, but from the perspective of a guest, and yes, from the perspective of the people who make this place run, day in and day out. I needed to know if my vision was still alive, or if it had been consumed by corporate bureaucracy and chasing quarterly earnings. Elena listened patiently, her eyes never leaving his. She saw the weight of his responsibility, the genuine disillusionment in his gaze. He wasn't a ruthless CEO. He was a man struggling to reclaim something he had cherished. "And what did you find, Mr. Arthur?" she inquired softly, her voice inviting his confession, his true assessment. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his slightly messy hair. "I found a lot of what I feared. Inefficiency, yes. a lack of genuine human connection from many staff members, a focus on procedure over people. "But," he said, locking eyes with her, "I also found you, Elena. I saw your dedication, your kindness, the way you treated every guest, every part of your job, with an integrity and care that most others lacked. You embody everything I ever hoped this hotel would represent. You see the details. You care about the details, the ones that truly define a guest's experience. You represent the best of what we could be." A comfortable silence settled between them, no longer tense but filled with a newfound mutual respect. Elena, far from being intimidated by his confession, felt a surge of validation. Her quiet observations, her unnoticed acts of kindness, her unwavering dedication, all of it had been seen, truly seen, by the man who owned it all. It was a profound moment, a collision of worlds, where the CEO's grand vision met the cleaning lady's ground-level reality and found common ground in the pursuit of genuine excellence. "I have some insights, Mr. Arthur," Elena offered, breaking the silence, her voice now imbued with a quiet authority that matched his own. "Things I see every day, things that could make a difference. Issues with resource allocation, specific training needs, areas where guest comfort is consistently overlooked, or where employees feel undervalued despite their hard work. Things that reports might never capture, but that impact everything." Arthur nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm listening, Elena. Everything. Tell me everything." The walls between them had vanished, replaced by a bridge of understanding, built on observation, honesty, and a shared desire for betterment. He realized that the answers he sought had not been in the spreadsheets or the executive meetings, but in the quiet, unassuming wisdom of the people like Elena, who held the hotel's very essence in their hands. The profound stillness eventually gave way to a new kind of silence, one filled with unspoken understanding rather than tension. Arthur, disarmed and exposed, found his voice, a husky whisper that barely escaped his lips. "How long have you known?" he asked, the question less an accusation and more a plea for comprehension. Elena's eyes, soft yet resolute, met his. She began to speak, her voice a calm counterpoint to the storm that had raged within him. It wasn't a single dramatic revelation, she explained, but a mosaic of small observations, pieced together over weeks. The unique, almost imperceptible way he straightened framed pictures in the hallways, not with a cleaner's efficiency, but with an owner's pride. The rare antique fountain pen he once dropped in the lobby, retrieved by another staff member before it reached her, yet the brand and craftsmanship were unmistakable to her discerning eye, the kind of pen a man of significant stature would carry. Then there was the specific brand of high-end herbal tea, exclusively for executive suites, that she found in his wastebasket, a small detail that had gnawed at her. She spoke of his quiet attention, the way his gaze lingered on details others overlooked, a scuff on the baseboard, a loose thread on a curtain, the subtle shift in a receptionist's posture under pressure. He wasn't merely a guest. He was an evaluator, an engineer of experiences, disguised as merely a recipient of them. She had seen the flicker of command in his eyes when the delivery truck had blocked the entrance, a momentary lapse that betrayed a natural authority he tried so hard to subdue. Her words were gentle, devoid of judgment, pure observation, revealing a mind as sharp and analytical as his own, yet rooted in the practical realities of the hotel's daily life. Arthur listened, captivated, his initial shock slowly giving way to a burgeoning sense of awe and an unexpected lightness. Elena wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was an oracle of the hotel's hidden truths, a silent guardian of its soul. He confessed his identity, his disillusionment with the corporate machinery that had replaced genuine hospitality, and his desperate search for the very essence he felt his hotel was losing. He spoke of the declining profit margins, the growing disconnect, the fear that his dream had become just another faceless enterprise. Elena listened patiently, her expression thoughtful, her gaze never wavering. When he finished, she offered her own insights, a raw, unfiltered assessment from the front lines. She spoke of the overlooked joys of seeing a guest smile because of a thoughtful gesture, the constant struggle against understaffing, the small victories of maintaining standards despite increasing pressure to cut corners. She talked about the dedication of the long-serving staff, the hidden talents that went unrecognized, and the simple truth that sometimes a kind word meant more than any five-star amenity. It was a perspective Arthur desperately needed, a mirror reflecting the true heart of his establishment, unfiltered by management reports or corporate jargon. A profound sense of mutual respect settled between them, bridging the chasm of their different worlds. She had seen the man behind the billionaire, and he had seen the wisdom behind the uniform. Arthur, reinvigorated by Elena's profound insights, returned to his true persona with a renewed sense of purpose. The transformation within the hotel was almost immediate and deeply impactful. He began by implementing reforms that directly targeted employee well-being, understanding that a happy and valued staff was the cornerstone of genuine service. Salaries were adjusted to reflect their true worth, not just market averages. Benefits were expanded, and a comprehensive training program was rolled out, not just for guest services, but for every single member of staff, emphasizing empathy, initiative, and problem-solving. Operationally, he streamlined processes, eliminating bureaucratic hurdles that Elena had highlighted as productivity killers. He created direct feedback channels from all levels of staff to management, ensuring that voices like Elena's were not just heard, but acted upon. Perhaps the most significant change was the promotion of Elena herself. Arthur created a new, pivotal role within his executive team, Director of Guest Experience and Staff Advocacy. Her office, once a small locker room, was now a spacious corner suite overlooking the city, but she still often walked the floors, speaking with the staff, observing, her presence a constant reminder of the fundamental values Arthur now championed. Her practical wisdom and uncanny observational skills made her invaluable in shaping new policies, ensuring they were not just theoretically sound but operationally effective and human-centric. She was the conscience of the hotel, ensuring that every decision, from budgetary allocations to menu changes, considered the impact on both staff and guests. The hotel flourished, not just financially, which it did, exceeding all previous profit margins, but also in its reputation. It became renowned not just for its luxury, but for its exceptional heartfelt service, a benchmark in the hospitality industry. Guests spoke of the genuine warmth of the staff, the personalized touches, the feeling of being truly seen and cared for. Arthur often recounted the story of his undercover mission and Elena's piercing insight, transforming it into a foundational legend within the company. It served as a constant reminder that true leadership stemmed from humility, from valuing every single person within an organization, especially those often overlooked, those who quietly, diligently, kept the heart of the business beating. His experience with Elena taught him that the most profound insights often resided in the most unexpected places, underscoring the invaluable lesson that every voice has power, and true value often lies in the unseen. He learned that the greatest luxury a hotel could offer was not opulent decor, but the authentic human connection fostered by a staff who felt respected and empowered. This story reminds us that true value often lies in the unseen. What unexpected heroes have you encountered in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more inspiring stories like Arthur and Elena's, subscribe and click here for our next video.